Hi everybody! So today I am going to be talking about the new Natasha Denona Mini Zendo palette. So a lot of people have already done reviews about this, so I'm not going to do a full sort of traditional review. I am going to show some eye swatches and talk about some potential dupes and just kind of explain how you could kind of dupe any of these colors if you were interested in doing that, because I don't think this palette is actually very exciting. So I have a story about this. So a subscriber sent me a message a few weeks ago letting me know that this palette had leaked. This is a trademark I talked about in one of my trademark videos, and it was being sold on a site that people commonly use in the US to resell product, not just makeup but other things as well. And I, being Canadian, could not just purchase it directly myself because I was very curious. When I saw it on the site, I was like, I want to buy this because this has to be legit. But this hasn't been officially launched yet, but this would be a really fun thing to do, like a fun video and something to talk about. If you check videos on YouTube for the Mini Zendo palette and you sort by date, you can see some of the old videos that people did just before this was released. And I think that's why it was released, is because it somehow got leaked. Somebody clearly got their hands on it when they weren't supposed to. How this happened is anybody's guess. There's no way of knowing exactly how it happened, but it did happen. And I don't really think this is a great holiday color story. So I got this because I sent the pictures, the links to a couple of friends, and one of my friends in the US, Hunter, volunteered to pick it up for me and send it to me. And then she very kindly considered it an early Christmas present. So thank you, Hunter, for that. I should have had this before it officially launched, but because of shipping, it had to ship to my friend, and then my friend had to ship it to me, and then shipping from the US to Canada was, of course, ridiculous, as it always is. So anyway, I still thought I would talk about it, but I just want to stress that I really don't think that you need this. I really don't think so. I would not have been interested in this palette. The reason I was interested in it was because it was a new thing that hadn't officially launched yet. Like, that's what was interesting to me about it. I was like, ooh, I want to try this out. I want to see what this is like kind of before anybody else gets the chance to do it. So it was that sort of thing, but the actual color story doesn't interest me. It's very similar to the Mini Retro palette. It's not the same, and I will show swatches. So I did just standard finger swatches. I did swatches comparing this palette to the Mini Retro, and then I've shown sort of individual shadows with eye swatches and with just like the hand swatches in comparison, just so you can kind of get an idea of what it actually looks like if you are interested in any of these colors. But I don't think this is very interesting. And yes, this is a legit palette. I can definitely tell from the packaging and what the shadows are like. But this does retail, for those of you who are interested, for $25 US. It's got 5 shadows. It is part of like a holiday collection, but it is also listed as being permanent. Now, the description of it from Natasha Denona is a lot more interesting than what it actually looks like, so I'm gonna read you guys this. It says it's an innovative, warm-toned palette that conceptualizes a mix of elements, an ambiance where wood meets metal and nature meets modern, features 5 highly pigmented shades. So that whole description of wood meets metal and nature meets modern is very exciting. And when I theorized about the Mini Zendo palette and the Zendo, because there's actually a trademark for a full-size Zendo as well. When I theorized about that in that trademark video, I was really hoping for something sort of similar, like a very similar concept, and I was really envisioning more greens, like sort of those chrome colors and browns and grays and greens, and I was really thinking of that same sort of concept, but this is not what I would have envisioned at all. So I'm going to break it down a little bit and explain some of what the shadows are. There's one shadow that's really interesting and unique and a very difficult to dupe sort of shadow, at least from what I have. I didn't look too far into my palettes. I really just looked at my single shadows. I don't have a ton of single shadows, and I haven't purchased any new single shadows in years, so I definitely am lacking in that regard. So this isn't a direct comparison, more of like a duping, just the general vibe, and also sort of how it would play on the eye. So I did put it on my eye today. I basically used every single shade with a focus on the first shade, which is called Stark. So Stark is a medium dark burgundy. It is a metallic shadow, so it has a slight pearlescent finish. This is the uniquest shadow in the bunch. However, it really only looks unique if it's all over your entire eyelid. If you're just using it as an accent shade, it's like in the outer corner, if you're using it to sort of like smoke out the lower lash line or something, it's not going to look very special. You could definitely get the same effect with a deep brown. Anything that has sort of like a brown with purple tones in it, a purple with brown tones in it, it's going to look very similar if you only apply a little bit, because that's essentially what the burgundy shade is. It's just that little pearlescent sheen that when it's all over the lid, it's really noticeable, but it could be kind of used interchangeably like you would use a matte shadow. So if you had a matte burgundy color, it would look pretty close depending on how you were intending to use it. So if you're interested in that shade, that's what I would suggest looking for. If you look for any kind of burgundy with a pearl or metallicized finish, that will give you a very close look to Stark. It immediately made me think of the Naked Heat palette. So I swatched the shade Ember next to that shadow. So in general, even like the warm vibes of this palette remind me of this palette, which is like my favorite palette from Urban Decay. I'd say 3 of these shades you could really accomplish similar looks with this palette, and then like one of the shades is kind of almost unnecessary, and then you would just have to add in a silver, but I'll explain. So this last shade in the palette, Ember, which is my favorite shade in the palette, gives me similar vibes. I would even say that Ember is a little bit more unique than Stark is, but it's still kind of close. And then through my single shadows, I did find this one from Pinky Rose Cosmetics, which I swatched as well. Unfortunately, these ones are not named on the back, so I don't know what the name of this one is, but I do know because the only ones I have that don't have names on the back are Pinky Rose. So these are Pinky Rose shadows, which I think are like $5. It's a similar sort of vibe. It doesn't have like an overwhelmingly pearl finish. It's definitely a different shadow. Like the Natasha Denona shadows are definitely unique, and the formula is spot on. The only shadow I had an issue with is the Duochrome one, which I will talk about when I get there. But anyway, that is probably the hardest shadow to dupe depending on how you would use that shadow. The next shadow is called Bear, and it is a pastel pink, and this is the creamy matte formula, so like the traditional Natasha Denona matte formula. It's really beautiful. Her mattes are wonderful. However, if you have the Tropic palette, you have the shade, not like identical, but definitely very close. If you look for something that mentions pastel pink, something that's a slightly warm pastel pink, you will definitely get this shade. And I would say that that's one of the easiest ones to dupe, if not the easiest shadow to dupe in this whole thing, because it's a very simple shadow. And I don't think that this one would get the most use from very many people. That's just me, maybe, because it's not a shadow that I would normally use except for to like blend other shadows out. It's not one that I would just do a full look with. And I had to build up the swatch quite a bit because it was so light on my skin tone, and I'm very fair, and I am, so for comparison, I am like an NW15 in MAC, so I'm cool toned, very cool undertones, and I am very light skinned. So I had a hard time getting that to show up on my skin. The shadow that I brought out that was from my collection that gave me similar vibes was Dreamboat from ColourPop, which is a matte shade, just a little bit more of the cool tone and more pigmented, just like because it's a slightly darker shade, more intense than the Bear shade from the Mini Zendo palette. I've also compared things to the Mini Retro palette, and you have 2 matte shades in Mini Zendo, and then you have the 1 matte shade in the Mini Retro palette, and that shadow is like the in-between shade of the 2 mattes that are in Zendo. So I do think Mini Retro is a lot more unique and a lot more interesting, although these could kind of be sister palettes, but you really wouldn't be able to do a whole lot of that with it together because there's so much repetition there. where really like the difference is like that matte green shade and like the burgundy from the Zendo. So I think that's a very easy shadow to dupe. Again, if you are looking for something that is like that shadow, look for pastel pink. The next shadow is another metallic shadow. It is stripped and it is the warm silver shade. So this is a beautiful shadow. I mean, Natasha Denona metallics are generally gorgeous. The formula is always wonderful on those shadows. So, however, it's a warm silver shadow. So I do really think that like the Mini Retro is the more cooler toned version of a similar color story. And if you are warmer toned and maybe thought the Retro would be too cool for you, you might enjoy the Zendo in that case because it is the warmer version of it. I compared it to the silvery shade that's in the Retro palette, as well as an Inglot shadow, which is 154, which is like a warm sparkling taupe, and then I compared it to a handful of shades from the Glam palette. As you can see, the Glam palette shadows are a lot cooler toned than the silver shadow that's in the Mini Zendo. But if you are looking for a shadow that's similar, look for something that's described as a metallic taupe, a warm silver, just something that describes it as being warm and also very metallicized, which is pretty common for a silver. It's not going to be a challenge to find, and if you are cooler toned, you may be better suited with a silver shadow that's cool toned as opposed to a warmer silver. It's just going to be the way that it's going to pull on your skin. I like warm and cool silvers because I love various chromy shades, and I feel like a lot of these shades, because they're warmer, pair really well with my eye color, so I like it for that reason. But again, I don't think that's a very unique shadow. It's just the formula that could come into question. Dazz is the next shade, and this is the duochrome shade. I had a rough time with this one. This is a coral with a bronze shift. This is like duochrome 101, like baby's first duochrome. I have so many shades that have very similar vibes to this one. I found it really applied very well wet. It was a very light shadow, which I was sort of surprised by. Now, there have been other Natasha duochromes that have behaved in sort of a similar fashion that just look better if they're foiled or if they're layered on top of other things. This definitely seems to be the case for that. But it's essentially a rose gold shadow. If you look for coral or pink with a bronze or gold sort of shift, you will come up with so many options. So I found three things. The first thing I immediately thought of was Come and Get It from ColourPop, a single shadow. However, when I was looking through my collection, I have China Rose from ABH, which was also sort of a similar vibe, and Expensive Pink from MAC, which again, similar sort of vibe when you see them sort of in the pan, and I have my swatches. I also swatched it next to L'Ombre from the Naked Heat palette, which is my most used shadow in this palette, which is a very similar sort of shadow. It gives a very similar sort of vibe. So I think this is that, and the pastel pink are probably the easiest duped shadows, because I feel like every brand that has eyeshadow has come out with that rose gold shadow. Like the pink with the gold shift is such a pretty shadow. It's such a flattering shadow. It's available from so many different brands, and you probably already have it in a palette or in your collection already. It's definitely not standalone unique to this, which is also kind of disappointing, because I would often look forward to the sort of duochrome shadow that would be in a Natasha Denona palette, and for her to do a rose gold is kind of a letdown. Like I said, this whole color story is sort of a letdown, especially on the heels of the Glam palette and just other more innovative, interesting things that she's done. This just seems like taking a step backwards, but that's just my opinion. The last shadow is called Uncovered, and that is another creamy matte shade, and that is a dusty coral. It is fairly unique when you put it on your eyelid. Like when I was doing my eye swatch, I was like, oh, I like this. This is different than what I thought. It even looked a little different around my eyeball than it did swatched on my hand, because it has those wonderful warm, like orangey tones that really make blue eyes pop, which is why I often go for like brown shadows that have red tones in it. Those are some of my favorite things for like emphasizing my eyes. Anything that has orange, reddish tones in it will really emphasize blue eyes, in my opinion, from my experience. So I really enjoyed that shadow. However, it may be unique to what I have, but I don't think it's unique to how I would use it and how other things perform. So initially I thought, because in the pan, and when I was searching through my single shadows and I pulled out this Makeup Geek one called Tuscan Sun, and I held it up in the pan next to the shadow, I thought that it looked kind of similar. Like I was like, okay, this is kind of a similar shadow. But when I swatched it, I could see how much more pink Tuscan Sun was than the uncovered shade. But because of how much like orange appeared to be in it, I decided to swatch shadows from the Naked Heat palette as well, specifically Cayenne and He Devil, which are two matte shadows in the Naked Heat palette. And they are not similar at all. Like when you swatch them, it just is like, what are you thinking? But they would accomplish the same sort of thing. Like if I was to put the uncovered shadow on my eye and then on the other eye put like the Cayenne shade from the Naked Heat palette, it would have a similar sort of effect, which would just be to make my eyes look bluer. And I don't feel like I would necessarily just like rim my eyes with just that color anymore. This is definitely something that I was really into a few years ago, which is where I wore stuff like Brown Script from MAC, like when that was all of the rage. And a lot of those sort of orangey brown shadows were very popular. I think like the Morphe 350 palette, something like that, in that sort of similar vein. I feel like that's what that shadow sort of accomplishes, the same sort of thing. It's not as overwhelmingly orangey, but depending on how you use it, it would be. In pairing with this palette, there's a few different things that you could do. I still might do like a multi-look, like maybe 2 looks or something with this palette, just to challenge myself, because I am not very inspired by it. Like I just want to smear that burgundy shadow all around my eye and maybe, you know, use the silver. But the other shadows don't really interest me that much, so maybe I need to challenge myself to find some ways to use it. But I think that there's probably going to be so many better things coming. I definitely wouldn't recommend this as your first Natasha purchase. I just, unless you are 100% sold on this color story, I don't think it's very exciting, and I don't think you can create a lot of looks from it that won't look too samey, because that is a problem sometimes when you only have a handful of shadows and you're limited to the looks that you can do, and everything ends up looking the same. Because if you end up blending out the shadows with like either one of the matte shades, they're all gonna look the same. It's just very like one note to me. It's very warm. I wish there was something a little bit different in here. It would have been nice to see maybe like a gray, like if that pastel pink was more of a gray shadow instead of that pink, maybe that would also work with the theme about it a little bit more, with a switch of the Duochrome shadow as well. It would be really interesting to see something that was a little bit more on theme and not have the pink gold at all, but then it wouldn't be a warm tone palette. And I guess going from cool now having a warm tone, maybe that makes sense. But to me, I don't fully see the vision, which is like the first time for me with a Natasha Denona release that I really just don't understand why. Like it just, a lot of the times her releases are like, oh, this is adding something new. This is something we haven't seen before. Whereas this, I feel like we have seen it before. I feel like we've seen it over and over again. And I feel like this is going back to trends that were popular a couple of years ago instead of moving forward with new trends, which is what I thought she was doing with like the Glam palette. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. I will do my best to answer everybody. Let me know if you are interested in seeing anything else with this palette, if there's anything in particular that you would like to see me compare it to, if you want to see looks with it. I want to know your thoughts with this as well. Like, am I completely off the mark here? Do you think that this is a interesting, innovative warm tone palette? Or do you agree with me and think that it's not as innovative? Like I'm really curious, and I will not be offended by anybody's opinions. I love hearing from other people, and it really helps me be able to see things from a broader perspective as well. So I really appreciate everybody's different perspective. So anyway, that's all I have to say about this palette. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I hope we get a chance to chat soon. Bye for now.